Welcome to Selling Circular, the podcast that explores the intersection of commerce and sustainability. Today, we're diving into the groundbreaking work of Metabolic, a system change agency in Amsterdam that's revolutionizing the way we think about and relate a circular economy experience to communities around the world. I'm Garr, CEO of LoopLayer.
And I'm Sabira Lakhani, VP of Product at Reaply. Thank you all so much for joining us as we continue to interview entrepreneurs and industry leaders as they uncover strategies and examples of what they're doing in their businesses to integrate circular economy principles into their operations.
If I just went like full YouTuber, can I just go like, smash that subscribe button? It's the easiest way to support our growing circular economy movement. But actually, please hit that subscribe button and reach out to us on LinkedIn and visit our new website at sellingcircular.com if you want to just follow up, not through LinkedIn.
And please tell your friends and colleagues about our podcast as well. We love doing this podcast. Everything about us is circular, and so we can.
Well, that's a bold claim. We all have our circular growth ahead of us.
Well, that's true. It's not 100%, but
right.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're all works in progress. Yeah. We have. But speaking of, actually, it's kind of a great segue into my latest work of progress is, I mean, you know this about me. I can't help but walk past a dumpster. It is, I would say that if I were to make myself closely aligned to an animal, it's probably a raccoon. I mean, I very much vibe with their lifestyle choices. And to that end, I have like a kind of a side hustle that I think is starting that is reclaiming waste from, and I'm not going to say the company, and I'm not going to say where I live because I don't want people to get in my hustle here.
Yeah, gotta stay business minded.
Yes. There's a company that is consistently throwing out their clients old frames when they get their new pictures or new paintings reframed. So every day, not every day, roughly every other, there's a new frame that's just out there. And so I literally have to go on my way to the gym. I walk there. I walk past. If there's something there, I immediately take it back home. And now we just literally
on Marketplace.
Exactly. I mean, I'm going to get a little artsy with it. I think I'm going to, because some of them are like kind of dated. I get it. But some of my favorite frames are the dated frames that maybe people spray paint, like maybe a solid black or get some sort of highlights in some cool ways. But we have now about 6 or 7 frames that we've gotten over the last, where I just discovered this. And now I'm hooked. So I walk past there every day. And when I'm walking the dog or going to the gym, and these are not insignificant. I mean, one of them is like 6 feet by 4 feet. Like these are not small frames. Yes, these are not little. Like we got another one today that was about probably 3 by 4. There was a one yesterday that was 4 by 5. Like, I mean, these are varying sizes.
And you're storing these in your place while you figure out what to do with them.
Luckily, we have been able to find a home that has a sufficient storage space for me and my trash hustle, my recovery of goods and turning it back into value. We either use them. Actually, we did a really cool one. We took an old mirror, and I'll have to get pictures of this. We took an old mirror that was sort of warped, so it wasn't going to look like a mirror that you would want that's going to warp your perception as you walk by it in your house every day. But the warping wasn't too bad, but we dripped acrylic dots on the mirror. So now we have this really cool entryway mirror that has like these funky, very colorful dots on it. And it's just fun. It's just sort of, again, for us, it's like, hey, welcome to our house. This is kind of a fun accent that we get sort of right as you walk in. So it's very entertaining. So yeah, trash, the values. Yeah, the values all around us. But I really, what that is for me is I'm kind of fascinated by their processes as a company. Like, why aren't they trying to reclaim that value? Why aren't they trying to create, because they could create like a new line. Maybe there's a customer that comes in and says, hey, I would love this. I want something that looks a little different. And so maybe it takes somebody to just go, you know what, we're going to keep these. I'm just going to kind of play with them and see what we can get sold.
Yeah, that initiative, totally. But as you were also talking about that, I was wondering, like, so the garbage truck guys are the ones like lifting this huge photo
Yeah.
frame and throwing it into a
Or just
truck and it's just
throwing in
getting
the back of the,
smashed. Like
yeah, yep.
it's,
Is any of that
and
surprising?
imagine throughout a whole city. It's not surprising. I'm
Yeah.
just imagining it. I think like that bulk, it's like that medium-sized business,
Yes.
bulky waste that
Yes.
just like is forgotten.
Yeah. And that's
I
one
don't know,
business.
you and yeah. Yeah, it's one
Yeah, you're
business
exactly right.
in
One
an
business
entire city.
and then an entire city. How are we actually getting to the point where we're trying to rethink
Yeah,
individual businesses' potential for waste and trying
right.
to think through that? And that's not maybe necessarily at the business to business level. It's probably going to be done faster at a policy based level or even a city mandate or initiative based level.
Hmm.
And that is where our
Yeah.
guest comes into the picture today, as Metabolic has sort of been on the forefront of consulting municipalities and other types of city officials and creating environments and initiatives over the last decade that is really geared towards a mission of transitioning the global economy to more fundamental, sustainable state as quickly as possible. So their work, they're Amsterdam based, spans across Europe and the US. They've got a couple cool programs here in the US, implementing practical solutions that address these complex sustainability challenges. In the EU, I got to go to this place, Decovel, spelled Deceuvel, if anybody's looking it up. And Decovel is this really cool. We're actually going to post a video of my walkthrough of it, but essentially it's kind of a playground of like work spaces built from repurposed houseboats. So you kind of walk through this bridge and you see
Mm.
these houseboats that have these essentially these offices in it. So it's kind of like a co-working space, but all broken up into houseboats and bridges. It's
Hmm.
very cool space, like right in a like a port slash bay area. So it was very cool. And so we'll post the video of that. The project not only showcased circular principles and how to reuse potentially these houseboats that were no longer going to be used for their first purpose, but because it's so tangible and you kind of walk through it, it's super key into like galvanizing local community buy-in. So that was the cool thing. You got the sense where it was like, oh, people bought into this because they could feel that, oh, this doesn't look crazy. This isn't sort of so out of bounds. It's actually kind of a really interesting area, and that helped
Mm.
boost even more sustainability initiatives in the area. In the US, Metabolic has made significant strides like leading programs for Charlotte, North Carolina, where the work with Charlotte is sort of the first city to commit to a circular economy vision. We will post actually their circular economy strategy and vision so that people can see and maybe even copy it in their own municipalities, how to actually start to establish more of a materials innovation hub or maybe incubate numerous types of circular economy businesses in your community.
Metabolic's vision for the future is one where the circular economy principles are deeply integrated into urban planning, business operations, and daily life, which I love because it's all around us and it can be all around us. And they advocate for a place-based approach for circularity. So they want to look for solutions that are tailored to the local context and community. And to discuss all of these initiatives and more, Andrew McCue is our guest today. He leads strategic initiatives at Metabolic. He's from the US, but living in Amsterdam, which is very
Yep.
cool. And he brings a wealth of experience in systems thinking and circular economy implementation. And he'll share those insights on how Metabolic was able to create and is continuing to create this tangible, lasting change in communities around the world.
One quick disclaimer, which I did see, which I think will just be interesting to call out. They just recently opened themselves up to a public investment round. So this is not investment advice by any means, but an interesting look at if you want to actually take more of a closer look at the company. You do have to be EU based to register,
Mm.
but you can still kind of take a look at their how they're laying out their future, their vision for how they would use the money and what it could mean for expanding circular economy programming. So that
That's
happened
cool.
post our interview with Andrew, so we didn't get to talk to him about it, but still
Ah,
nonetheless an interesting development in the last couple days.
very cool.
Enjoy the interview with Andrew. Thank you for joining us here, especially from where you are outside in Amsterdam. Somewhere, where exactly are you in the area?
I'm in an area of Amsterdam called the Barsjes. It's the western part of Amsterdam near a number of lovely parks that are important to us because we have a little dog we like to take there.
And how
Yeah.
long exactly, as an American, how long did it take for you to start nailing down these pronunciations, or
Oh,
just
I still
like
haven't nailed it. No.
okay, just winging it
It's the
every
kind of
once in a
thing.
while?
Have you ever seen Brooklyn Nine-Nine? There's like an
Yeah.
ongoing joke with Nikolaj, Charles' son, and he always corrects
Yes.
people's pronunciation. It's exactly that anytime you try and speak Dutch to a Dutch person. Actually, they don't even try it. They speak English better than native-born speakers.
Yeah. So they're just like, please
Um,
stop. We'll
yeah,
do it
this
your
is
way. Yeah.
embarrassing for both of them.
Yes. Exactly. Well,
Occasionally, they appreciate the effort, but you
good,
know.
good. Well, starting with these pleasantries, I do just also want to rip right into it, which is a
Hit
statement
me.
that you made to me, which I
Uh-oh.
loved in in a previous conversation, in which you said if you're launching an individual circularity business, you are launching it into a hostile environment. Now,
Yeah,
that's
you're
a very
throwing a
nuanced.
pool of piranhas.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that for our audience a little bit in why that is? Because you're hitting on a level of network effect. You're hitting on a level of not enabling or non-existent enabling policy. You're hitting on a couple levels there.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good one to dive into.
Might as well.
I'm
Yeah.
trying to figure out how I want to respond to this. The analogy that Eva and I have been using recently is that if you want to grow a garden, you don't just like throw a couple of seeds onto the concrete sidewalk and expect a vegetable garden to grow. You got to first rip up the concrete, and you've got to build up healthy soil. Maybe if you're in a city, that means cleaning out the pollutants that were in there, bringing in new soil, adding in compost, some mulch, whatever, watering it. Then you plant the seeds, and then you have to tend to them over time, remove weeds, protect them from predators, and help them grow. The same is true with a new circular business. What you're doing if you launch a circular business on its own is now competing with the entire status quo of a very entrenched logistics system, a very entrenched physical infrastructure. It's not even just entrenched, it has literal concrete foundations that you're not going to change very quickly. You have a similar challenge in regenerative agriculture. The reason you can't get a premium for it is you can't keep your premium regenerative crop segregated from highly chemical commodity crops because there's only a handful of very large processors who can't, like cost of operations can't segregate out just your product. Similarly, our logistics systems are set up to go one direction, not to also have takebacks and work them backwards. But I know that's something you've probably heard a lot from John Holm about, Circular Supply Chain Coalition. Um, and policy is not there. Sometimes there's random. You'll be working really hard on a circular product and find out that, oh, actually, this state doesn't allow you to recycle that particular kind of battery after that many years of use. Um, and suddenly you're up Shit's Creek without a paddle. Similarly, in the built environment, this is really prevalent. If you don't have a building passport, a product passport, but for an entire building, you have no idea what's in there. You don't know until you've smashed through a wall and find that there's just horsehair plaster behind it, or instead find that there's actually a very solid beam behind it. You don't necessarily know. And so you can't contract the right people for it. You can't train the right people for it. You can't have the right equipment in there. You can't actually build your project plan for deconstruction without a wrecking ball and jackhammers and sledgehammers and such. Um, so all that to say, the knowledge infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, the legal infrastructure, and then the mindset stuff, the people's buying habits, what they're used to. You have to explain the word circular to a lot of people still. It's not there. So if you just try and launch, I'll give you an example in Amsterdam. We set up the Circular Innovation Collective specifically on textiles because we did this research on the Netherlands, which has circular economy commitments under the EU Circular Economy Action Plan that they're totally not reaching. I think we did a status update. They were adopted in 2015. We did a status update in like 2019 that saw that they were pretty much already it was physically impossible to reach their 2030 goals already because people don't realize how fundamental the shifts are that need to be
Yeah.
made. So we looked at where the investment was going. Investment was going to the seed investment to a couple of cool, shiny ideas. Early stage, not covering any volume really, and no established relationships. Again, like a really sketchy path to scaling up. And it was going to MRFs, recycling centers, and automating, putting automated equipment in recycling centers to give you a marginal increase in the efficacy of segregation in that MRF. And there was nothing in between. So large scale investments weren't going to truly circular businesses, and circular businesses were not connected to each other and really didn't have a chance to scale up. So we worked together with Impact Hub, Bankers Without Boundaries, and the City of Amsterdam to put together a pilot program where we looked at all the circular textile startups in Amsterdam, what's currently happening with textile waste. We brought those entrepreneurs together and identified, okay, if we're trying to close that full circle, what are the jagged holes in that circle that we need to bridge?
Yeah.
And how can we bridge them? Is that an existing business developing new capabilities? Is it the city investing in certain kind of infrastructure or changing policy, giving them access to feedstock? Or is it a whole new business that needs to come in there and actually occupy that part of the supply chain? Now, what we're able to do is we got funding up front from the city to get started with it, and then a second tranche of funding that was linked to outcomes. If these businesses were able to achieve a certain tonnage of material diverted and reused, a certain number of products and customers reached, and then a second tranche would be unlocked. But it was still probably 5 to 10% of the total funding that would be needed if you really wanted to make the entire textile value chain circular. And they're still competing with, in Amsterdam, there's still a Primark, there's still an H&M, still a,
Yes.
Everyone's still ordering from Shein, this kind of stuff. So that's what I mean. You're still
Temu and Shein.
got this massive status quo, a Goliath of a status quo that you're introducing one David into. You got to put in a number of them, turn them into an army, and then you can start to do something.
There's a lot to unpack in that, and I appreciate the primer there because it's important to, I think, set the stage. You started to hint upon some of almost, and we can get into metabolic. We can in a little bit, but there was a little bit of an operating thesis in there, which has it sort of identifying a place and sort of a physical boundary, geographic boundary, funds necessary to potentially catalyze some type of action, but then the political apparatus and backing. Can you talk a little bit about, because you've been with Metabolic for some time, you've worked with Ava for some time. How do you gain the political capital? What does it take in this sort of circular space to start to influence policy and enable trust that this is a direction we should probably be heading?
Well, I'll tell you where we've been able to have a lot of success is in initial projects where just as technical advisors, as researchers, as consultants, working with public entities, proving our work, showing the quality of it, showing them the receipts, the data, the bibliography that goes behind it and the thinking. And also running a lot of capacity building, so a lot of training sessions. So we put in a lot of time outside of sort of unpaid time at speaking events, workshops, at networking events, talking about this stuff, bringing people along with us to sort of painting the picture of what is possible and how we see it. And one thing that, now that you asked the question, I reflect on is that it's been a lot easier to build trust and relationships with public servants than it is with politicians. You might say bureaucrats, politicians, right? The civil service, unelected officials who do the day-to-day administration of the government, end up being a lot more straightforward to work with as a business because they are operating almost like an institution or a business, whereas politicians are more directly tied to politics, to ideology, to narrative, to optics. And so what's worked in those cases, we've had some success in the city of Charlotte. That was with the German Marshall Fund. We brought civil servants over to Amsterdam and they saw a bunch of circular economy living labs and experiments and our work, and they were inspired, and then they wanted to bring it to Charlotte, and we never talked to the mayor. Right? Charlotte is a city manager government where the mayor is very visible and sort of sets the vision and direction for the city, but the city manager is the CEO, and controls the budget or a large portion of it. And so a lot of the sort of structural resources the city government can put towards it goes through the city manager's office. So by impressing the civil servants, including the city manager's office, we are able to get Charlotte to be the first city in the U.S. to commit to a circular economy vision and strategy for themselves. B, get them to put $4 million towards a materials innovation barn that has now been operating for 3 years or so and is currently only at about 120 tons of diversion per year, but they are experimenting with about 15 different material streams and actively incubating 10 circular economy businesses, which we think is a really good sort of seed or node for expanding circular economy work within the city. It's a long-winded answer, I think, but I would look towards the civil servants more than the politicians, and build on, you have to do the work first to gain their trust, and then paint the bigger picture.
Do you feel like the civil servants have enough influence to carry over time, to outlive the politicians and the political swing that happens back and forth? Like, or do you need to get political capital to kind of move them in a certain direction as well?
I absolutely think that they can, civil servants endure beyond administrative change and beyond sort of political party shifts, particularly in a parliamentary system like the Netherlands. Most of the civil service stays intact when a new party comes into power in the parliament. The ministers change over, but those are political positions. The actual people executing the work under the minister, they stay in place, and there's wiggle room around that, right? The plan, the sort of manifesto from the ruling party will come down, and that'll change a little bit how things work. But the bones of the structure is the civil service. This is exactly one of the things that's really weird and interesting in the US. It's exactly what people are frightened by, the deep state. When they don't like it, you call it the deep state. And there's reason to be leery of that. But if you politicize that group and actually say, if they don't explicitly support the party in power, they will be fired, and we'll put someone who will support the party in power, regardless of qualifications or experience, you start to have a government that starts being ideological rather than operational. And I think we've actually done a remarkably good job in the US of staying functional and not ideological in how the government operates, at least on the lower and mid levels. But I know that's a big element of debate in the current election year.
So tell us, who is the we? I know we've kind of brushed on Metabolic, but
Yes.
Yeah, who's the collective?
I am a part of this group called Metabolic. Metabolic is a systems change agency in Amsterdam, founded about 12 years ago, with the explicit mission to transition the global economy to a fundamentally sustainable state as fast as possible. So for us, that means meeting all human needs within ecological thresholds or boundaries. If you're familiar with Kate Raworth and her donut economics, it's the same idea. You need to consume a certain amount of resources in order to meet everyone's fundamental needs, but you also need to limit that to a certain level so you're not sort of eroding the foundations for Earth's life support systems. That's what we're aiming towards. Big mission. From the start, Eva Gladek, our founder, had in her mind an ecosystem of multiple organizations that could both do the analytical work to identify the root causes of what's going wrong, the most effective solutions, where you might intervene in the system to shift the whole thing over, as well as entities capable of implementing and putting those solutions into place. So at the moment, we are 12 years in, we're still adding in entities, and we're not at a full complement yet. Part of my team's job is to think about what comes next. But right now we have 2 for-profit entities and 3 not-for-profit entities, all under an umbrella group that is steward-owned. For folks not familiar with steward ownership, as a form of ownership where there's a foundation that is, or an individual or golden shares, a couple different ways of setting it up, that intervenes in the governance of the ecosystem of the entity to make sure that it stays true to its mission over time. So it's someone who's removed from the day-to-day operations, but expert on the mission and bought into it. And it's their job to hold you accountable to that mission over time. So we are very much a mission-driven organization. We have a consulting team that works in circular economy with cities, with businesses, and then works on nature and biodiversity restoration work with businesses and NGOs. We have an academic research team that does a lot of work into urban material flows, as well as bioeconomies. How do you measure, manage, optimize competing demands for biomass within various bioregions? These are ecosystems of a certain kind, right? The bioregion of Chicago might extend pretty far out into the Great Plains, whereas Boston is actually, I think south of Boston is probably a different bioregion from north of Boston. You can tell because the coast south of it is all sandy and looks like Long Island and Cape Cod, and the coast north of it looks like Newfoundland and Maine, and it's all rocky and very different. That suggests they're different biomes you'd be looking at. So how would you use that to govern an economy or manage an economy? Anyway, that's quite theoretical academic work. So they're working with universities. Then we have a ventures team. They're not investors. They're not a fund. They're actually thinking about how do you use entrepreneurship and innovation to create systems change, and how do you inject systems thinking into innovation and entrepreneurship so that you don't end up with yet another online grocery delivery app or addictive Facebook game, but rather directing that entrepreneurial energy towards stuff that can really change the world.
So in that venture capacity then, real quick, is that something, how do you all, and you mentioned this to some degree maybe as a part of your mandate, but sourcing these new ideas, are these from within? Is this, you guys take applications for people that are on locations in cities and they don't know where, they have an idea, they have some of the background, but they need some theoretical or logistical or some sort of application support? What's that process look like?
Yeah, there's actually a pretty straightforward answer to that, and it involves the research institution and the consulting team. The consulting team act as scouts out in the market. So if we're researching interventions and solutions for a given client, that gives us a reason to go out looking for these sorts of things. And then, of course, we keep that information. And when we model out the projected impact and then how they work over scenarios, given trade-offs, we have a whole database internally with what is the solution, what is it applicable for, what are the projected impacts. So that's already quite a valuable asset. Then our research institute pulls out more of the theoretical things from the world of academia. So those are two big sources of where we find these solutions. The third one is that our ventures team runs innovation programs. So they are putting out calls for applications and inviting entrepreneurs to join these innovation programs, and then coaching them up on systems thinking, on the systems that they're trying to change, and then the entrepreneurs themselves. So it's not so much sourcing the ideas as it is sourcing the people who will come up with the ideas and running them through a process to generate the thinking and refine those ideas.
Yeah.
So there's three different sources. Maybe a fourth would be through some of the partnerships we set up. We are a collaboration first organization. And you might have gleaned from my introduction, we have a very big and ambitious mission, and there's no way we can do it on our own. So some of it also comes through partners and friends and allies in the space. I know there's a lot in our ecosystem. There's two last things. We have a software team that is automating a lot of the quantitative analyses we do and turning them into tools, so you don't have to hire annoying consultants every time. You can actually just get a software tool and run the calculations yourself.
Are you guys the annoying consultants?
Yeah, of
or
course.
Is some other annoying? Okay, got it. Okay, that's right.
Yeah, if I had to keep hiring consultants in every time I had to do something at work, I'd probably get annoyed over time, no matter how much I like the individuals.
Making yourself obsolete is good by just making moving on to the next big problem.
If we had our way, we wouldn't be doing that much consulting. We'd be doing a lot more venture building and project development and actual getting our hands in the ground. But it is what it is. So the long-term goal is to make consulting not needed because everyone is thinking this way. Everyone's capable of doing it.
Everyone's already educated and moving in that direction. The last thing we have is a foundation based in Aruba that does bottom-up work towards a circular economy. So they run citizen science programs monitoring the reef health around Aruba. They run education programs in schools in Aruba. They run maker spaces, beach cleanup parties.
They also are, at this point, kind of a de facto recycling service for the island of Aruba. They do a lot of capturing waste from hotels and tourism and turning it into durable local infrastructure. Think plastic composites being turned into benches, bus shelters, recycling bins and trash bins, etc. Things that can be used locally over and over, not just the nice little bracelets that people wear for 2 months and then throw away. So that's really fun. There's some of our original colleagues from when we founded Metabolic 12 years ago who moved back to Aruba and kept doing the kind of stuff that we were doing.
That's cool.
Oh yeah, go for it, Seb.
Many questions.
Many questions.
Always.
I was curious. I really love the breadth of the work that you do, and it sounds like there is focus both on more towards end of life, but also when you were talking about the problem of not having data about what's in a building, that's kind of like a beginning of life problem.
Absolutely.
When you don't know, somebody has had documented that information maybe somewhere, and we don't know where it is, and it's not really accessible. So can you tell us, how are y'all thinking strategically to advise customers on where to start on their circular journey?
Yeah, that's a great question, where to start. And it comes right back to why we're called Metabolic. I'm afraid that if you search metabolic.com, you'll end up on some diet pill website. But you get to metabolic.nl, you'll get to us. But the point is that we look at any given system, a business, a city, a building, a neighborhood, an entire sector, whatever, as a metabolism. It is ingesting materials and energy, it is producing products, and it's producing waste streams. So we take a materials first approach to identifying where to start. So a lot of our circular economy work, you're going to see some combination of a life cycle analysis with a material flow analysis. Maybe there's spatial elements mixed in there as well to help make it more operational. But what we're really trying to understand is which materials have the most value, which materials have the most impact in a scope 3 sense, and sort of the production of them, and as well as which have the most impact in downstream end of life. Matching that to what's currently happening in the region that the project is taking place. So if you have this building, these materials, these products, and they end up in the waste stream through no fault of your own, they end up there. What's going to happen to them? What's the likelihood they get diverted for recycling, they get diverted for reuse or repair, they go landfill, they get burned in a pit, they wash into rivers. And this helps give us a sense of the opportunity and the risk of different materials and products. So there's a couple of different ways you can look at it. You can go all the way down to the raw material level, or you can go to the product level. And by adding in the economic value as well as the embodied footprint of that material, we can start to prioritize which products, which materials an organization, a city should be focusing on. That's the most common way that we're prioritizing things. So a great way for folks or businesses to start who haven't thought about circular economy, but maybe already have a sustainability team with the carbon footprinting. If you push that carbon team to add in scope 3, you're going to be looking a lot more at this kind of data that we use for our prioritization. Right? What is the embodied environmental impact of that material? Now you can start to think about, okay, that's the material to focus on.
I have one more follow-up. Sorry, Garr. How do you think about deciding whether to do at the raw material level or the product level? Is it depending on the customer? Because I would imagine that some customers can't overly influence at the material level. Yeah. They might, but they might have more influence at the product level. So yeah, how do y'all think about that?
Wow, you answered the question for me. It really depends on the client. Right, so if we're working with a food and beverage company, then the material might make a lot of sense, particularly if they're not doing highly processed, complicated products. Working with an electronics company, you maybe care about the materials if you're going to get the critical metals out of it, but the components are what's really valuable. It's not, a functioning microchip or motherboard, whatever, is going to be a lot more valuable than the however many micrograms of gold are on that chip. So reusing something directly is the most valuable, repairing it is the next most valuable, remanufacturing, where you might have to take certain components out and replace them, That's the next. And then you get on down to recycling and recovery. That's the lowest. Um, and that's, I forget what the question was in the first place.
Well,
Oh,
Lord,
how do we decide on products versus material level? Um, it's also a little bit feasible. Like if you're talking about electronics, what is feasible to recover? How much do you control it? If you're talking about organics, I mean, Gar, I think we spoke earlier about
yeah,
the very big difference between two halves of the butterfly diagram from
yeah,
MacArthur Foundation,
yeah.
biological cycles and technical cycles for recovery. But at Building Sabira, we're going to talk about both material and product. Product will help us make the economic case for deconstruction. Material is going to tell you a lot more about the landfill capacity that you're saving and the embodied CO2. Um,
Well, then this is drilling down then deeper into aggregation and trying to extract such a terrible word in this case. Bear with me. But
you use the E word.
yeah,
How
the E
dare you?
word. Yeah, but to at least aggregate the most value. Where I'm trying to say is, how do you go this set of motherboards, microchips, internal components are of this value, and then the other ones are not. And then again, it goes all the way down from the remanufacturing down to the recovery. But what I'm trying to get at here is I'm curious how you think of this, how Metabolic thinks of this when it comes down to the geographic or even economic conditions of a geography that can't be, that are out of maybe one's control. And how do you come into a system and try to almost bespoke that solution? Because all of these geographies, these flows, I guess these flows of commodities and materials and products, they flow in different directions according to the policies and economic conditions of that environment. And so I'm really curious how you guys think of that when you're seeing either building materials, electronics, other types of whatever industry or sector. How do we handle that? What do you guys recommend to the lay people that are just getting introduced to this? I even hate that puts us in some sort of hierarchy. Not my intention, but how do you talk about this with Metabolic in that geographic, economic, boundary building types of assessments?
Look, we try to get as practical as possible.
Right.
You, as you know, X organization, have varying levels of control or influence or no control. We're trying to do a triage exercise
Yeah.
with them. You have very strong relationships in this region because your HQ is there. You have invested a lot in the city, and you have strong relationships at the state level. It's a great place to run a pilot because you already have relationship capital to build upon. Some things you might be looking at are you can influence your direct suppliers, but your tier 3, tier 4 suppliers
Right.
are starting to be pretty far outside your influence now. Maybe we don't prioritize them. So what that often looks like is focusing on own brands first, and then tier 1 suppliers, and then figuring out what sort of coalitions you should sign up to, or what kinds of commitments or certifications could actually help you reach the last group of suppliers that you might be, 10, 12
Yeah.
layers removed from in
Yeah.
many cases. This is also maybe a little bit idiosyncratic given that I have a foot in our regen ag work as well as our cities work, but I really think context matters a lot. I'm starting to see both of them as extraordinarily place-based. Circular economy in Amsterdam looks very different from it does in Chicago, and it has to because it's not the same place. They're both pretty flat, but that's about all you got. The urban plan is different. The culture is different. Consumption and behavioral patterns of the individuals and the communities there are different. The laws are different. The weather is different. These are all going to have some sort of impact on how circular economy is expressed in practice. I really think that the most effective circular economy is probably regional to a certain extent. So our first ever project was building De Keuvel, which is a circular economy playground in Amsterdam North, an old polluted shipyard we built out of houseboats that were destined for landfill. We bought them for €1 each, and then refurbished them, pulled them onto land as buildings.
I'll be posting a video of that I took when I was there.
It's a really cool
Yes.
one. It's a really cool place to hang out too. But that actually galvanized the community in that part of Amsterdam, which used to be super industrial. It's now the fastest developing place. I mean, in the past 4 years, they've sort of built a new high-rise or mid-rise, hyper effective, efficient, sustainable condo building. It seems like one a month. It seems like they're going up so fast. But that community was galvanized by the building of De Keuvel, by the programming within it to actually create a manifesto for that neighborhood, which is called Bouwslotterham. And that manifesto was not binding legal agreement that the city had to adopt, but it did lead the city to designate the area a living lab, a circular economy living lab, where they will experiment with a lot of the different ideas that they're playing around with. And it did result in significantly higher circular economy and sustainability ambitions for the buildings that went in there. And that is just that's a place-based expression of these values. One of the reasons we wanted to build De Keuvel as a circular economy living lab was to take some of these ideas out of the abstract and make it tangible. You can hang out in it. You can see it. You can see what it tastes like, see what it looks like, see what it smells like. See the diagram and be like, oh yeah, this toilet is perfectly normal to use, even though it happens to be capturing the urine for struvite extraction to go into plants later. Fine, my user experience is exactly the same. Why don't we do this everywhere? Or like this building is built entirely
I have a picture of that
materials.
I have a picture.
Blurred out in all the right places.
Yep.
So I really think it's going to be context dependent or place based. So this is actually leading into a little bit of what our team is focusing on for the work that we want to do next is these sort of place based interventions. In the investing world, you already see some place based funds. If someone wants to invest specifically, your family has been in Chicago a long time, you ran a business very successful in Chicago, you want the money to go back to your community. It is actually a pretty known thing. You can either set up a foundation that does grants there, but you can also set up an investment fund that focuses only on entities who are registered in Chicago, employees in Chicago, etc. Pretty sure we can combine that with blended capital facilities to empower circular economy ecosystems in different cities. We already see in the US lots of cities building resilience hubs, innovation centers. There's a standard already set for putting tech and life science hubs together. And people are starting to expand that logic towards materials and material value chains, not just the digitized and science world, but rather the physical value chains.
Well, I'm going to hand this back over to Sabira, but I think what is just really hitting me in this explanation and as you're pulling these threads is how visceral, how tangible, what this means to a community to understand the impact, to understand what the vision is, as opposed to some digital technologies, that gap of understanding of like, how does this actually apply to my day-to-day? What does this actually mean for me? When on the other end, people are like, oh, I know exactly what this is for. I see this every day. I get to experience this impact. And I think that I don't get that often here. And the first time I really felt that was in two different cities. It was in Copenhagen and Amsterdam, which is I got to feel change in a way that I hadn't actually get to feel before.
Yeah, and until you spend like a month here biking everywhere, you don't realize that with the right urban plan, you don't need a car.
Right.
Right.
Well, and that's so curious to me because it's almost like that experience is almost part of the sales process, right, to the end user. But going upstream from that, Andrew, like what does it take to convince a city or your first customer to bite, right? Because of what you said, that it's so contextual. You would have to do, I'm imagining, a lot of almost like free consulting to say it's worth it for y'all to move ahead with the circular economy project pilot for an enterprise or for a municipality. Describe the legwork that goes into that.
The legwork is often helped out by you. It's a consultative sale. I mean, this is a long-term involved process where you're building a relationship with someone who gets the long-term vision, believes that your organization can do it, and will help you navigate the internal decision-making structures and politics of the organization. The other thing that you got to do is just show them how they're already committed to these outcomes, and this is just a more effective tool of getting to those outcomes. Right? You already want decarbonization. You already have a problem with your landfill. You already want to create jobs. Look, we can tie these things together. An example in Charlotte for them was the year that they came to see Decova was the year that they were ranked 50th out of 50 for economic mobility of the top 50 US cities. Um, and now they've moved up. Last year they were 38th. And in reflection, being ranked 50th out of 50 galvanized a huge amount of momentum for a lot of different things, not just the work we did, and we're by no means taking sole credit for that change. But by being able to tie circular economy opportunities specifically to that problem and that ambition within the city, we also knew that they had a timeline left on how much landfill space they have left, so we had two hooks already that we could tie into it. Say that you have these two problems, and on top of it, it kind of has all these other upsides if you do it in different ways and how you want to tailor it to your needs. A lot of folks are already committed to achieving the outcomes that the circular economy can achieve for them. And I'm just going to show that it actually is one tool that can generate multiple outcomes. We are very firmly of the belief at Metabolic that the many different challenges or the sort of polycrisis that folks are facing today, there's a lot of challenges or opportunities out there, but they all stem from a smaller number of root causes. And if you get down to those root causes and switch from linear to circular, for example, or switch the mindset there, or switch how it's organized, you can address a whole host of solutions at once. The deeper you go into root causes, the harder it is to make that change, right? Talk to anyone who's been to like a zoning board meeting. Gosh, zoning is hard to change, but it would be so impactful if we got rid of mandatory parking minimums, right? Just one thing that no one ever voted on in the first place.
That there was a major set of lobbyists that 100 years ago.
There's a very good,
yes.
very good YouTube channel called Climate Town, and he has a fantastic video explaining mandatory parking minimums. I highly recommend Robbie Williams for this. Yeah,
that's excellent.
I had a whole other rant I was going to go on, but I was so pleased with Robbie Williams that I forgot what it was.
You just were like, what an amazing video, just bask in it. Well, hopefully it'll spark again. I want to address then one other big ugly question around consumption and how you personally, Metabolic, how we all grapple with economic growth, grapple with the rebound effect of circular economy potentially, where people are like, oh, I can just keep consuming, because if we solve these problems, or just consumption in general, where we probably do need to just be good with what we have a little bit more often. How do you sort of wrap your head around this complex consumer action?
Me of
oh, good. Okay, excellent. See? There we go. Yeah.
The thing I was thinking about, this is sort of tying back to the question about place-based circular economies as well. I am firmly of the belief that if you make a circular economy work, you kind of have to decommodify things. A commodity is anonymous, interchangeable. You don't know where it came from. You don't really care because you can just get another one. And it's the sort of paper plate of the world. It has no identity. Ultimately, I think a circular economy calls on us to be hyper-materialistic, not in terms of taking materials and throwing them away, but caring so much for your material that you know every aspect of it inside and out, and that if one part of it breaks, you will fix that part rather than throw the whole thing out. It requires attention, it requires care, it requires relationships, not just you to your suppliers, your customers, your partners, but you to your objects, your products. You have to have a relationship with it, otherwise it ain't gonna work. Otherwise there isn't any sort of emotional valence to it. There isn't the motivation, there isn't the mindset. So I think we do need to be more materialistic in paying attention to our materials and loving them and caring for them, as well as paying attention to our neighbors, to our clients, to our suppliers, to our partners, because it's on that relationship capital that you're going to be able to build a circular economy. Now, when everything is a subject, everything is something you have a relationship to, you get more sort of enriched life experience out of that than you do from wildly consuming anything,
Yes.
from having a retail therapy session that makes you feel worse the day after, right? It's a longer term solution.
Can I
I think, yeah, go ahead.
can I just jump in real quickly? Either of you, do you have an object? Do you have an item? Mine is I have my backpack, and I have this great obsession attachment to it. It was one of the first things that when I started to get into sustainability, I was like, you know what? I need a thing that's going to be with me for a long time. I bought a great Patagonia backpack, and it's just been what I travel with now forever. And so I when you speak about that visceral emotion, frankly, it got me through a breakup. It was there with me on adventures. So it's like I have that attachment to it. What do you two have? Is there anything that comes to mind?
Backpack's a good one.
What did you say? Backpack is a good
Go
one.
ahead.
Yeah,
Go ahead,
yeah.
Sabira.
There were two purchases I made when I started caring about waste that were representative to me. One was I bought from Urban Outfitters like a bike chain that is a keychain.
Cool.
So that stayed with me, and it stayed with me for I think about a decade, and then I made the mistake of like asking my friend to guard it, and she lost it, and that was really crushing. I still feel emotional about it.
Yeah.
But there was another, I had a pencil case that was kind of like one of the, it wasn't a TerraCycle product, but it was like that style of weaving that they would do with candy wrappers. I had bought it at like a flea market, and it's so sturdy and it's beautiful and it stays with me. And I really I love that too. Yeah.
Well, Andrew, I want to get to yours, but I think what I love about that is how there's a weird relationship when you care about an item so much, but it's also impermanent and has the potential to be gone out of our life in a sudden moment, where it's like it's that weird tension between impermanence of the material and our relationship to it, and how much we need to make sure we keep these materials around, these products around, but by nature they will always leave.
That's true.
And so it's a very strange relationship. Andrew,
That's very Buddhist of you.
Yeah, I might be influenced a little bit by some recent. My brother is actually becoming a Buddhist monk, Andrew. So this is where I might be.
What kind
very
of Buddhism? Do you know?
a Vietnamese Buddhism of the tradition. I should nail down. I actually don't know by name. I know it's Thich Nhat Hanh's tradition. I bet I could just do a quick Google of what that is, and he'd be so disappointed that I don't know this off the top of my head. But it's just
if it's relatively new, you have time. You have an excuse.
I do have time. Yes, I do. It is relatively new. Yes. But Andrew,
I have to say I love my backpack as well. Shout out to my high school best friend Will, who got it for me. He's the kind of friend who loves product reviews and research. And right after college, when I was working for freight farms, I traveled 26 weeks in a year setting up hydroponic farms and shipping containers around the world. And the backpack I had was not up for it. So he got me a backpack from Thule. It was the sort of thing. I had enough pockets of all the right sizes and shapes that I always knew where the passport went. I always knew where the phone, Kindle, computer, all of the places they go in the same place every time. So I don't have to think about it. And it's like if you pat your keys in your pocket and they're not there and your heart drops. I have that relationship with my backpack. And that one has migrated now to my sports backpack because he decided when he saw the state of it to get me a different one 5 years that I also use in the same way. And it goes everywhere with me. But because you said backpack, I'm going to give a different answer, which is my cast iron pan. What I love about it, it's not like something that's easily repaired and such, but what I love about it is that the curing process is like an active, dynamic thing. It's almost like a relationship. Whereas if I cook something very sticky or sugary and then I have to sort of scour it with salt afterwards, then I have to sort of build back up the cure so like before I try and fry an egg directly in it. So it's like an ongoing relationship. It's not like each use is separate from the use before. There's actually a red thread that goes through it, and it reacts. It's directly related to how much care and attention I put towards it.
What an excellent example.
Bougie as hell, I know, but
well, I think what I don't want to do though is purely end on these items because we had so many good threads too.
Well, we weren't done going down the rant
We were
of
not.
consumption,
Yes.
which is to say, one of the biggest barriers I think we face is that no matter how many good people you have in a publicly traded company, if they have stagnant unit sales quarter over quarter, people getting fired, people getting sued, and that's a significant limitation on the field of the possible for that business, and that's baked
Yes.
into its legal structure. Very hard for them to change that. And similarly, the wonderful sort of social safety net of many Northern European countries only financed by GDP growth year over year, right? The tax base is dependent on that. So if you want to keep those social goods, you're going to have to try and migrate it off of this form of funding, which is suddenly gets really politically fraught. It's not impossible. Plenty of deep thinkers and theorists have pointed out different ways to do it, but then it's sort of the political and economic risk to do it and to build the willpower to do it. Similarly, if you're working in packaging or consumer products and thinking about circularity, until your company can survive stagnant unit sales for an indefinite period, you can be a spiral, but you can't be a circle.
Right.
Essentially.
Right. Yeah.
You can keep things in use for as long as possible, but circular economy will be a goal, not a reality for you until you are able to sustain that. And it's baked into the legal structures in many cases. This is what I mean about consumption. You're not going to buy your way out of the climate crisis. We're not going to eat or consume our way out of it. We're going to have to address consumption. I think the latest, who is it? Global Commons Alliance just put out a paper in The Lancet about a safe and just operating space within planetary boundaries. It's quite academic. They're talking about what we need for healthy humans and a healthy planet. And the hard truth is that wealthy nations, that the highest consumers in the wealthiest nations, are going to have to consume less. You can still be rich, fabulously wealthy, have a yacht, but maybe not 3 mega yachts, right? We're not talking about sort of Stalinist communism. We're talking about as wealthy as we were in the 50s in the US or 60s, where you still had a 90% tax rate for the highest tax bracket in the US. We are so far from that now.
Yeah.
We have decided that it's better to let a few individuals consume as much as they want and screw everyone else than it is to ensure that everyone has food, a house, clothing, fresh water, clean air. So I think that a lot of the estimates I have seen is that if you want to live within planetary boundaries, we have, for the population today, everyone could have the energy and material consumption we had in the late 60s, which is pretty damn good. I mean, as far as human history goes, it's pretty damn luxurious. That is one of the degrowth projections that people have to go to, are saying you would go towards. It's a hard sell on a mindset and an economy based on unending progress and individual achievement. But that's some of the cultural mindset shift that I think a lot of folks are willing to change, but they're almost never willing to change in isolation. They're doing it in the form of community. This is where the human relationships come back to it again.
Yep.
I see a lot of interesting organizations and communities who are showing the way, but then a lot of them are isolated or small scale, and they're not connected to each other, and they're out-resourced, frankly outgunned by the titans of industry.
Well, then I think what you've done just then is, I think you've painted a nice picture of the challenges ahead, but you've started to also paint a little bit of a glimmer of the hope. And so what, if you were to really distill it down, what brings you hope? And when we look at the landscape of what's ahead, where do you find is really that through line for you, where like, okay, this is why I'm doing this. This is why I actually get a lot of hope out of this.
Everywhere that we do work, every sector, every city, every neighborhood we look at, there are people doing really impactful and cool things and thinking far ahead. And maybe they're not using the same language, or maybe they're not speaking the same language as the funders or the visionaries. Or whatever. But they're there and they're doing it. And they keep doing it. They keep wanting to do it. And they post about it online and stuff. Everywhere we look, It's like going back to the gardening metaphor. If you ever gardened in a city, good luck keeping grass seeds out of your garden. I have a third and fourth floor apartment here in Amsterdam, and my roof terrace is just completely taken over by grass seeds that were floating on the air. They're everywhere, and they're in the soil. If they give them a little bit of space to breathe, suddenly, boom, you got grass growing. I would think that a lot of the solutions, a lot of the people that we need, the work that they're doing, kind of like that. It's everywhere, often overlooked, often invisible. You give a little bit of space to breathe, and you got grass growing. Um, that's the metaphor I would use for it. Yeah, it gives me hope.
I love that. Andrew,
Wow.
thank you for the time today. I look forward when we see you next.
Thanks,
Thank
Andrew.
you so much for having me. It's always fun.